Good evening, everyone. Today, I'd like to continue our exploration of the five hindrances. And the subject for tonight is what the Buddha called sloth and torpor. So I just want to congratulate all of you who are here live because these are the hardcore people. Everyone can show up for desire and hatred and grief. But if you showed up for sloth and torpor, you are super hardcore. So congratulations. And even if you didn't show up live, you're still hardcore. You can be hardcore too. Maybe you just can't make it. So some of us, we might have a concept of what the meaning of the word sloth is. We've heard it before in the context of the Christian Bible, the seven deadly sins. And of course, there's a really cute animal called the sloth. And so that's not such an unfamiliar word to us. Um, but if you're like me, you're wondering, what the heck is torpor? So out of curiosity, please raise your hand if you've ever used the word torpor in a sentence outside of the Buddhist context. Yeah, me too. I've never used that word. I barely even heard the word outside of the context of Buddhism. Um, and I've heard a number of Dharma talks about sloth and torpor, and I've read about them in a number of books, and I still wasn't super clear about these concepts. They were kind of like a little bit foggy to me. Uh, and everyone talks about them slightly differently, and sometimes they contradict each other. So I began to wonder, maybe nobody actually knows what these words mean. So I asked Google, of course, and Google says, nobody really knows what these words mean. No, actually, except Webster. Webster knows, and then also Cambridge. Cambridge knows. So Google pointed me to Webster and Cambridge, and so I read a couple of definitions. I wanted to share them. So sloth. Let's begin with sloth. Uh, it's a noun. Obviously, there's a really cute animal named the sloth. Um, Also, it's a disinclination towards action or labor, or indolence, so avoidance of activity or exertion or laziness. Also, spiritual apathy or inactivity, i.e., the deadly sin of sloth. So, another definition suggests that sloth is a sluggishness of mind and body, or laziness, or a sinking state. So, torpor. So, with torpor, there's a lack of mental agility or flexibility, and also sleepiness, and also a quality of inactivity. According to Webster, um, it's a state of mental and physical, or mental and motor inactivity with partial or total insensibility, the inability to feel something, especially to be moved emotionally. And there's a lack of awareness or concern or indifference. And so torpor is also defined as a state of lowered physiological activity, typically characterized by a reduced metabolism, heart rate, respiration, and body temperature occurs in varying degrees, especially in hibernating animals. I thought that was interesting. And also described as apathy and dullness. And in the Cambridge Dictionary, it's a state of not being active or having no energy or enthusiasm. And in biology, is referred to the state of reduced activity when animals are hibernating during the winter. So here are the official definitions. To me, they're pretty synonymous. Both words, sloth and torpor, they include uh, a combination of mental and physical qualities of sleepiness or laziness or inactivity or fatigue. Um, so now I'm wondering why we always talk about them together. Um, so there's some nuances. I can see the nuance in the definitions, but there's also a lot of overlap. So it seems a little redundant, if you ask me. When when I was growing up and I was having dinner with my family, either at home or in a restaurant or whatever, if somebody asked for the salt, my mom would pass both the salt and the pepper. And she says, the salt and pepper go walking together. And I always thought that was so strange. Like, I really just wanted salt, but okay, I accept the pepper as well. And clearly, she learned it from her mom. The salt and pepper go walking together. Does anyone else have this rule in their family? No. I grew up thinking that's what we all do. But after years of psychotherapy and years of meditation, I finally have liberated myself from this deep family lineage pattern of having the salt and pepper walk together. And so in my house, you can just ask for the salt and just receive the salt, and that's all you have to do, or just pepper, whatever you like. So it's like that. The sloth and the torpor walk together. And again, it feels a little redundant. It's like, can you please pass the salt and the salt? But it actually has to do with the original translation. So in the Pali words, Sthina Mida. So it's hyphenated. Thina hyphen Mida. So Thina is sloth and Mida translates as torpor. And for some reason, the Buddha hyphenated them and put them together. And so that's why we do. We always use those words together. But someday, when I go and I have more therapy and maybe I have some more deep meditation retreats, I'm going to be more liberated. And I'm just going to talk about torpor without sloth. But for today, I'll talk about them together, just like everyone else. Anyway, so it's common to notice the expression of sloth and torpor in our meditation practice, especially in the first couple of days of a retreat. Many of us spend so much of our lives over-engaged and overstimulated, and we can have withdrawal symptoms when we remove all the distractions and um, all the stimulation from modern life and come into silence. And it doesn't have to be just a retreat. Sometimes just in our everyday life, in our everyday sitting practice, you sit down and you can feel the effects of this. And the immediate side effects are sleepiness and dullness and even boredom. I remember I did a retreat with Howie Cohen, who's a wonderful teacher. And it was the first couple of days of a week-long retreat. And he said, always in the first couple of days, so the teachers are sitting out in front of everyone, and then there's 100 people in the room facing the teachers, and so the teachers like looking at all the um, yogis, and he says, "You look like a bunch of Jews at the Wailing Wall." Can you picture that? So in Judaism, when we're reading from our sidurs and our prayer books, we have our books up here in our face, and there's a lot of nodding and rocking and bowing. And so if you go to the Wailing Wall in the Temple of Jerusalem, everyone, all the Jews at least, they're all nodding and doing this motion that's like part of the ritual. And I just like started cracking up because he's looking out at everyone trying to meditate, and everyone's nodding off, for the first couple of days of retreat, because everyone's so tired and exhausted. So there's a lot of bowing and bending and almost falling over and then waking yourself up. So it can be like that, and it can take some time to acclimate to the slowness and the quiet. But then often our minds will get used to it and become quite awake, and quite engaged with the silence and the stillness. So how else might this show up in our practice? So it's not just sleepiness or boredom. It can show up as a quality of withdrawing from our lives or withdrawing from difficulties. So rather than confronting or engaging with them, we kind of back away. And this can become a vicious cycle. Um, when we withdraw, it can become a pattern or a habit, and then it's easier to remain disengaged and lazy or passive and lethargic. And we can become complacent, and then it's difficult to access our strength, difficult to engage because we're so used to this pattern. One of the ways where we might notice that we're caught in sloth and torpor is if we notice that we're annoyed with energetic or motivated or successful or accomplished people. So that can be a clue. If we're really bothered by the people who seem to have a lot of energy and are really energetic and motivated and successful, maybe that's our own sloth or torpor that's kind of showing its face in a kind of unconscious way. Joseph Goldstein says, when the mind is contracted under the influence of sloth and torpor, there's not much joy or pleasure in the practice and not much delight in our lives. We're always pulling back or holding back. The practice of mindfulness of the Dhammas with regard to this hindrance is a powerful way of freeing the mind of this influence. The first steps are simply to notice when sloth and torpor are present and when they are absent, so that we can recognize the difference. We get to know our minds very clearly. So just paying attention to when those feelings are there and also noticing and appreciating when they're not there. According to the texts, the main causes of sloth and torpor are unwise attention to discontent or boredom or laziness and drowsiness. So that is, if we're not able to notice or name or pay attention when these states arise, it'll turn into sloth and torpor. So that implies that these states, discontent and boredom and laziness and drowsiness, it implies that they will arise. They're natural states, so we shouldn't be surprised or disappointed when we feel them and when they do arise. Um, and they can compound or expand upon themselves if we don't pay attention and if we don't practice mindfulness. So, in other words, if we have a thought like, I'm so tired or this is so boring, and we actually believe it and we're actually identified with um, that thought, and we fooled ourselves into thinking that there's no harm in identifying with it, then we can actually perpetuate and intensify these experiences. Just as thoughts can trigger feelings of desire or hatred, thoughts can also trigger feelings of sloth and torpor. So it can be like a vicious cycle. Rachel and I were having dinner a few nights ago, my wife, Rachel. And I told her I was, having our Zoom Sangha coming up and I was going to talk about sloth and torpor. And she said, are you going to tell a funny story? She knows that I love humor and I love to tell funny stories. And so I said, yeah, I'm going to tell the story about how when I was having dinner with my wife, Rachel, a few nights ago, we were sitting down and I was telling her about the Zoom Sangha. And she asked me, are you going to tell a funny story? And I said, yeah, I'm going to tell a funny story about the time when I was having dinner with my wife, Rachel, and then you get caught in this vicious loop. So it's not really a funny story, but it's the vicious cycle where one feeling or one thought feeds the next feeling. And I really just said that story for her because I know she would either roll her eyes or laugh, one or the other. And also, I don't have a lot of funny stories for sloth and torpor because they're boring. And most of the stories that I've read about, they're boring. So it's like this one time I was so bored. Well, is that the end of the story? Well, no, then after a while, I wasn't so bored. Or, oh, this one time I was so tired. And then I just kind of powered through my day and then I went to sleep. There's not there's not a lot to say with sloth and torpor, and that's also the nature of what it feels like. There's like this fogginess and this kind of dullness. So one thing to keep in mind with sloth and torpor is that there sometimes are subconscious survival strategies. So it's our subconscious mind trying to protect us from experiencing a difficult or painful emotion or reliving a traumatic experience. So we can become numb or sleepy as a way to protect ourselves from having to feel emotional pain. So this is a healthy and normal response to trauma um, or adverse experiences. It's a healthy and normal response. Our subconscious mind is doing this for us. So we don't have to deal with it until we have the necessary safety and the necessary resources, the inner and outer resources to process the experience in a healthy way. So in these cases, it can be most skillful to honor this as the wisdom of our subconscious mind and not try to resist or change anything or make anything go away. And in these cases, we could ask ourselves, I wonder if there's anything deeper here, that if there's anything I'm trying to avoid feeling. But if we do this, we should do this with a light curiosity. So not with the thought or expectation that we're going to heal everything all at once, or we're going to get to the bottom of our deepest wound right now. Um, but just showing up with curiosity and asking ourselves, is there a difficult feeling here? And if there is, can I be with this? And then if the answer is no, if it's too painful or too scary or too much for this moment, then really respecting that no, and then allowing ourselves to check out. And there's nothing wrong with that. Allowing ourselves to be sleepy or kind of dull or bored. Another possible cause of sloth and torpor is overeating or overconsumption of intoxicants. And if this is the cause, it would seem like an easy solution, right? Just don't overeat or don't, overconsume intoxicants. But those patterns are not usually easy to change. We usually need a lot of support to change habits like that, and addictions to food or substances. Regardless, the first step is to notice the pattern and notice if this is what's happening, if this is why I'm constantly feeling this kind of lethargy or laziness. And then once I notice that maybe this is a pattern, then I can kind of find some resources and find some support. As usual, the process of transforming sloth and torpor or creating the conditions for the removal of sloth and torpor, as they say, it begins with mindfulness. And so this is the same as all the other hindrances, noticing that it's happening and making that experience the object of our attention. So, what is it actually like to feel bored or sluggish or tired? Instead of just sinking into them, we can ask, what is this experience like? What, that I'm calling sleepiness. And if we actually pay attention, even in our sleepiness, it has a kind of liveliness to it, an engagement. And if we actually pay attention, it's actually not so boring. It'd be so interesting just to, feel this moment. One of the prominent translators of the Pali texts, Analayo, he suggests that the first step in working with all the hindrances is not to actively oppose them, but in recognizing and paying attention to the experience itself and recognizing the conditions related to its absence or presence. So, in other words, mindfulness of the experience. Sometimes mindfulness is not enough. It doesn't help. Or we can't, it's difficult. It's too difficult to become mindful in that moment. And fortunately, the Buddha was very practical and he offers some other suggestions that might help. First, it's important to acknowledge that sometimes we actually just do need more sleep or better quality of sleep. And in these cases, becoming aware of sloth and torpor, again, it can be just an indication that this is what we need. It's time to prioritize sleep hygiene or our lifestyle so that we're getting more rest, more sleep, or better quality of sleep. And that's a big, topic, and there's lots of resources out there for helping us to have better sleep hygiene and get more restful sleep. Another suggestion that the Buddha offers is that it can be helpful in working with this hindrance to brighten our awareness by including more objects of focus in our attention. Meaning, if we usually meditate by only focusing on our breath, or our breath is the anchor of our attention, then we can begin to include other anchors, like we can include body sensations or sounds. So this gives our mind more to do, which can be stimulating and can be helpful. So rather than just really, having this one anchor, we begin to add other layers of the other anchors that are available to us. And the Buddha calls this developing clarity of cognition, or mental clarity, or clarity of knowing, depending on which translation you like. And another phrase is radiant mind. I like that translation, radiant mind. In Tibetan, the word radiant and knowing are the same. So quality of knowing is in itself a quality of radiance. Joseph Goldstein talks about this, and he says, in developing radiant mind, we focus more on the knowing aspect than on what is being known. During this, with sloth and torpor, is somewhat like seeing fog reflected in a mirror. I love that analogy. It's like seeing fog reflected in a mirror. And then he says, even though fog as an object is not very distinct, the mirror reflects it perfectly. So here we want to be more aware of the mirror than what is reflected in it. Similarly, even though dullness and sleepiness can be diffuse states, the knowing mind itself knows them perfectly, and we can become aware of the knowing itself. So that's where it actually gets really interesting. You begin to pay attention to the knowing, and give that more attention than the object. So if that makes sense to you, try that. Other practical suggestions include changing posture. So if you start to get sleepy or feel this dullness or sloth and torpor creeping over you, you can change your posture. So that can mean opening your eyes. So if you typically are meditating with your eyes closed, you might open your eyes, and that can bring a little bit more wakefulness, and not like super wide open, but just a half open state where you're kind of relaxed with a soft gaze. You can also stand up. So if you're in a sitting meditation, you can stand up and do a standing meditation. You can do a walking meditation. You can also go outside if it's comfortable for you to go outside. You can just bring your cushion or your chair outside and meditate outside, and then hopefully there's some nature available to you, or at least some fresh air, and that can bring a little liveliness to your practice. You're allowed to splash water on your face, and it's encouraged. You can splash water on your face just to wake up a little bit, brighten your senses. You can pull on your earlobes. You can tap your body, just kind of say hello and wake up your body a little bit. So these are just some practical suggestions that might help in the moment. Another suggestion is to practice wise reflection. So sometimes there's specific suggestions for wise reflection in different scenarios. And in this case, we consider our precious human life and consider our impermanence. So remembering that this body and this individual, as we all are, is going to die. And if we're fortunate enough to become conscious during our dying process, um, our bodies might be in a weakened state, our senses might be dulled, our mind might be fatigued or cloudy. Um, and it's a lot of us have this intention or hope that we can be mindful and awake during our dying process. But it's difficult because our physical body is, having these difficulties. And it's really not unlike the sleepiness or cloudiness of sloth and torpor, according to um, the wise ones. And so, how would it be to practice working with sloth and torpor as if we're practicing for our own dying process? So, when I consider this, it adds a layer of alertness and interest to that experience because I can show up in a different way. It's not just dullness and sleepiness of this moment. It's like, oh, I'm actually practicing. Can I be present in this fatigued state of mind and body? So if that works for you, try that. Also, Sangha. So what we're doing here. So we're engaging with friends who inspire us. We're engaging with friends who share our spiritual practices or have similar spiritual beliefs. Um, and that can really help to kind of bring some quality of connection and aliveness to our practice. And that's why Sangha is one of the three jewels that's so important to our practice because it helps to keep us engaged. So, as always, the Buddha also talks about the prevention or preventing the future arising of sloth and torpor. And the words that he uses are, how do we prevent the future arising of sloth and torpor? Developing qualities of arousal, endeavor, and exertion. So if we develop these qualities, arousal, endeavor, and exertion, that will naturally prevent sloth and torpor from arising. And it also prevents sloth and torpor from increasing or expanding. So I found that suggestion fascinating. So if we focus on arousal and endeavor and exertion or spiritual exertion, then yeah, that can be enough. That can be helpful. Okay, so why don't we sit for a moment together? So I invite you to make yourselves comfortable. You can sit if you like to sit. If you're feeling a little sloth and torpory, you can stand up or you can walk. You can lie down if you're feeling more tension or alertness. If you need to relax more, you're welcome to lie down. And you can open your eyes or close your eyes. So if you're feeling really energized, you might choose to close your eyes to help you kind of settle. If you're feeling a little sleepy, maybe it's the end of your day, or maybe you're tired of hearing me talk about sloth and torpor, you can leave your eyes partially opened, just with a soft gaze on the floor in front of you. So please do your best to make yourselves comfortable and make yourselves at home. We're going to sit together for 15 or 20 minutes. So find a way to be comfortable for about 15 or 20 minutes. So we begin by finding a connection to our anchor. It can be helpful to choose one. So we can choose to pay attention to our breath or our physical body sensations. or we can choose to pay attention to sounds. So I might notice the way the air moves through my nostrils, moves down the back of my throat. I can notice my chest rising and falling with each breath, my belly rising and falling. So this might be enough. This might be the only anchor that I need, or I might choose to additionally bring some awareness to my body. So I can notice my touch points. Where is my body touching the cushion or the chair or the floor? Where is my body touching other parts of my body? My hands or my legs, my clothes. I might notice areas of tension or pain, or areas that feel really spacious and relaxed and open. Sensations of hot and cold. Whatever it is, can I just let that in? Maybe that's enough, or maybe I still need to enliven my mind a little bit so I can then begin to incorporate sounds. Can I notice my breath and my body and also notice the sounds in the room or the sounds outside my building? If I'm feeling really active and restless and my monkey mind is really cooking, then it might be more helpful to focus on just one anchor. But if I'm feeling sleepy or fatigue, sloth, torpor, then I might want to incorporate as much of these qualities of awareness as I can. Brighten the mind. How would it be to notice my energy level right now, or my lack of energy right now? If I'm feeling pretty excited or full of energy or awake, how is that for me? How is it to be awake and engaged? In this case, I'm noticing the absence of sloth and torpor. And can I be with that? What is it like to notice the absence of these qualities? So I'm feeling sloth, torpor, fatigue, fogginess, boredom. What is that like? Can I be with that experience? So again, I notice my quality of focus and attention. In this moment, how engaged am I? How engaged am I in this moment, in this process? Am I really here? Am I nodding off? Regardless of what my experience is, can I be with this? Is this okay right now? And can I allow myself to experience this? How would it be to bring my attention to the part of me that is the mirror or the knower, rather than focusing on the objects or experiences themselves? Can I bring my attention on the knower, the awareness itself? What happens when I pay attention to awareness itself? What happens when I focus not only on the fog or the cloudiness, but the mirror, or not the brightness or the light, but the awareness of the brightness or the light? From this place, you might slowly begin to come back into your physical experience. Bring your attention back to one of your anchors, noticing sounds, noticing body sensations, noticing your breath. And I invite you to come back into your room. You can open your eyes or wiggle your hands and feet. Give yourself a wiggle in your spine if you like. Any thoughts or reflections or questions? Siri?
Yeah, I was just wondering about when you had mentioned somebody Goldstein had said something about the constricted mind, and the hindrances seem like they're just these constrictions of like they're perfectly natural states to move through. But
Mm.
if you're stuck in it and you become like almost noun in it, mindfulness is just a way to reverb yourself so that you can move through it. Is this like kind of accurate that the hindrances are only hindrances if you're stuck in them, but they're not anything bad to like experience and move through?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it depends on who the teacher is, kind of, because some teachers um, have this approach of like we're annihilating the impurities, um, and it's kind of like we're trying to rid ourselves of these qualities of mind. And and in the Buddhist text, he talks about the removal of the hindrances and the removal and the prevention of future, arising of the hindrances. So there's some kind of underlying um, agenda for removing the hindrances. In the same way that, being on the spiritual path in general, there's an underlying agenda to be somehow free of suffering and to be liberated and to live with a loving heart and compassionate and loving kindness and generous and all these things, right? That's our agenda, but the way to get there is not by striving, and it's not by like necessarily trying to control. So I had a lot of confusion about the hindrances for many years until I started thinking about them, uh, or until they were introduced to me as a teacher. And so when the hindrance arises, this is the teacher. And so we can welcome it and not push it away. And when it comes up, like this is just an opportunity to be present. And because we have a name for it, now we can notice it when it's coming up. And then it's a gateway to become more mindful of it. And then the mindfulness itself is leads to the dissolution of that hindrance, at least in the moment and maybe even permanently. But we can't get there by like, you know, trying to reach for it. We have to get there by being here in the moment with whatever the experience is. That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's an inherent paradox, and that's like true in a lot of different teachings of Buddhism and a lot of different spiritual traditions. So there's that paradox, but the practice is what's here right now, and can I be with that?
Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
okay. Yeah, thank you.
great question. One thing that I thought to share is this particular hindrance, sloth and torpor, is a really vague one for me. It's really confusing, and it occurred to me that there could be a couple of things going on for me because I don't have like a really intimate relationship with it. Like, we talked about hatred or aversion last month, and then we talked about desire. Like those, I just feel really connected with. Whereas sloth and torpor, like I don't like really feel so engaged. And on one level, that's part of the nature of that quality of consciousness is like this kind of fogginess and disengagement. And also, I have a certain bias on like recognizing my bias and my internal aversion to feeling bored or dull or like a lack of aliveness. And as soon as I notice like the like little hints of it, I will push it away by engaging. Um, and maybe that's healthy. Maybe that's the engaging that the Buddha was talking about, or the endeavor that the Buddha was talking about to, use that to rid ourselves of this particular hindrance. Or maybe it's my aversion to that feeling state. So I'm kind of playing with that and getting curious about that within myself. Okay. Well, thank you all for showing up. Lovely to sit with you and practice as usual. And yeah, looking forward to next time. Wishing you all a fine evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.